Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet, Ad Astra.
The podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack, your resident space policy advocate.
And I'm Newton. I'm your guy for space technology. And we back, baby. That's right.
We back,
That's
baby.
right. It's about time. We know we said we'd be back in September. We've had a few technical difficulties getting things back together.
Logistical in nature as well.
We promise you something special is coming down the pike that's going to change Ad Astra forever. So we'll get to that, but before we get to that, let's talk about what we're going to talk about this week. So in our latest from Washington, we have it's Orbit. We celebrated Orbit Day this week. NASA and NASA coming into operations, and there's a continuing resolution in honor of that. In our Space News Highlight of the Week, we talk about, what quite frankly is the Space News Highlight of the century, so we'll get to what exactly that is in a little bit. In international news, we talk about U.S. and China space agencies wanting to work together and NASA opening the door to additional cooperation with China. In Latest in Tech, we'll talk about a National Academies report on our Exoplanet strategy going forward and some surprising items within that report. And in Coming Soon to Space, we'll talk about Coming Soon to Space, where basically we'll speculate on what's happening with IAC and how no one is attending it this year. So, Jack.
Absolutely nobody. There's no Twitter feed or whatever.
Nothing. All right. Jack, kick us off with latest from Washington.
All right, so the biggest thing that happened over the last month really was a budget battle that happened on Capitol Hill. I'm sure if you're involved in any sort of policy arena, you've been following closely that there were 3 minibus small packages of appropriations bills to fund the federal government for fiscal year 2019. 2 of those passed, and everything else had to be given a continuing resolution. So for those who maybe this is the first time you've heard continuing resolution or you need a refresher, a continuing resolution is a bill put forward by the Congress and signed by the president that says we're going to fund a particular agency or particular group of agencies at current levels per the current fiscal year that they're signed. So what this means for NASA is that their funding is stuck from now through December 7th at $20.7 billion if you were to extrapolate that to a full year. What we're really getting is the truncated amount for that from October 1st through December 7th. And come December 7th, hopefully we'll have a minibus bill or some sort of appropriation, at least for NASA, that brings it up beyond 20.7. Currently, the House and Senate are both fighting over numbers. The House is saying 21.5. The Senate is saying 21.3. There's a $200 million difference between the two.
Do we know what would get cut in that?
The difference between the $200 million. It's just, it's change here and there. Everything goes up from fiscal year 2018. It's just things go up in different increments. Mm-hmm. Planetary science, one that you and I both care a lot about, goes up in both. Actually, in the House version of it, goes up by almost $500 million more than the Senate version.
Oh, wow.
So other things within the Senate version aren't funded as highly, and some things are funded higher in the Senate version than the House version. I'll link my NASA budget spreadsheet, which I keep up to date. I think it's currently up to date to the latest version of both House and Senate appropriations bills, which is, I think, mid-June or mid-July, up to date to 18th of July.
By the way, can I say I love this statement? I'll update my NASA budget spreadsheet. I'm a big fan of that statement. And make sure you're all at home, listeners, updating your NASA budget spreadsheets. All right.
Hey, that's why I'm doing this, so they don't have to. This is a public service that I'm providing.
Yeah, but you'll have to you have to share and make sure compare notes with the listeners. All right.
Yeah. Hey, if listeners, if you are keeping a NASA budget spreadsheet at home, please take a look at mine, make sure my numbers are right.
Oh my God. The NASA budget could be stored as a ledger, and you know what that means. Blockchain, blockchain, blockchain. I think I just
Oh
got
my
us like
God.
300 more likes on Facebook. You're welcome.
Exactly, and I just checked my my Coinbase, and my stock just went my Bitcoin just went up,
Solid analytics,
and
baby.
now it's down.
All right, keep going. Sorry.
What are we even talking about? Oh, continuing resolution.
Yeah.
So there's the House, the Senate, and the White House version. The White House is actually requesting about $1.5 million less than both the House and Senate versions for fiscal year 2019, with major cuts to the Earth Science program, as we will probably discuss maybe in a future episode, maybe never again, and also a few cuts, a couple of international programs, the the Education Office within NASA, something that who needs that? Who needs space grants?
What scientist has ever been inspired by NASA during their educational, coming of age?
I know. I never was.
Seriously. That's a laugh cry, ladies and gentlemen. That was a laugh cry.
That is.
Go on.
But yeah, so that's the big thing that happened for NASA this last week. If Congress had not passed and the president signed a continuing resolution by, as of recording this last night, September 30th, there would have been a government shutdown for NASA. But thankfully, we have now staved off the wolves until December 7th, when if another continuing resolution is not passed for NASA, NOAA, there's a few other departments in there that I am not actively following that are funded through December 7th, that if they're not funded with another continuing resolution or an appropriations through an omnibus bill, then we go into government shutdown mode just for those departments and agencies, and it becomes a whole logistical nightmare within the federal government.
I mean, but do we think there is any actual chance of that happening though? Like realistically speaking, given politics and everything, I can't see that happening. Can you?
I could see it happening all right, so NASA is not a heavily politicized agency, right? You would agree with that. There are some agencies that are included, NOAA being one of them, and again, we will get into this.
Don't read ahead.
Don't read ahead. Don't skip ahead, listeners. There are some agencies that some of their programs might become politicized in a budget battle if a lot of members of Congress do not have a job starting January 3rd. So between now and December 7th, there is a very big election. Remember, go vote. And in that election, the House of Representatives, the control of the House is in the balance. Democrats are poised. Last I saw there's like Nate Silver does his statistics thing and gives us a chance of the House flipping. And that's
an interesting way of describing Nate Silver's organization, 538.
I honestly don't want to follow 538 after what they did to me in 2016.
They didn't do anything to you. That's how probabilities work. Moving on.
Anyway, so if the House flips and if the Senate flips, and we're looking at a Republican president facing down a Democratic Congress going into a budget battle, the Republicans in power currently through January 3rd might find it in them to pass a budget very quickly. If there's obstruction within the Democratic ranks who are going to be taking power in either the House or Senate, there might be the question of whether the government shuts down through the new year. Now, a December government shutdown is not uncommon. We generally see, one of the most famous government shutdowns, the one under Clinton, was during the holiday season. And it was basically from December 16th, 1995 to January 6th, 1996, and it was all over competing priorities of a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. And the federal government's not really functioning much during those times. There's research and activities going on. But if you were to have a government shutdown at any time, during the holidays is probably the best time if you want to have the least amount of impact on government services being provided. But still, at the same time, a government shutdown does not look good for either party and just kind of brings us into 2019 at a head politics as usual, I guess. But I really don't think that a government shutdown is likely in December.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we will have to see. But in the meantime, we can move right on to our space news highlight of the week. Jack, you know what our space news highlight of the week is?
Oh, it's IAC in Bremen in Germany,
It
International
is.
Aeronautic Congress.
That is
Oh,
certainly happening.
does this news item begin with an E and end with Elon Musk?
No, actually, it begins with a C and ends with climate change. We're not talking about IAC. We'll get to that next week. I am going to avoid going on a rant by going on a rant here. So it's
This
funny. I
guy,
have this in my,
ladies and gentlemen, this is a truncated version
yeah.
of what I heard earlier today.
Yes. Yes, this is a truncated version with much less swearing and yelling. It's funny, I have this labeled in my notes here as everything dies. Anyway, so the Washington Post had an exclusive, which has been picked up by many other outlets over the weekend, showing that, quote, last month, deep in a 500-page environmental impact statement, the Trump administration made a startling assumption. On its current course, the planet will warm a disastrous 7 degrees by the end of this century. It also adds, quote, but the administration did not offer this dire forecast premised on the idea that the world will fail to cut its greenhouse gas emissions as part of an argument to combat climate change, end quote. Once again, they didn't say that this was a bad thing. Instead, they stated just the opposite. And once again, quoting Washington Post here, the analysis assumes the planet's fate is already sealed. The draft statement issued by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, was written to justify President Trump's decision to freeze federal fuel efficiency standards for cars and light trucks built after 2020. While the proposal would increase greenhouse gas emissions, the impact statement says that policy would add just a very small drop to a very big hot bucket. Now, the problem is that the administration put out this report stating that we don't need new regulations for passenger cars, and it directly conflicts with the most recent National Climate Assessment report written in 2017 by NOAA. The report states that, quote, the magnitude of climate change beyond the next few decades will depend primarily on the amount of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, emitted globally. Without major reductions in emissions, the increase in annual average global temperature relative to pre-industrial times could reach 5 degrees Celsius, or 9 degrees Fahrenheit for my American listeners, or more by the end of the century. With significant reductions in emissions, the increase in annual average global temperature could be limited to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius or less, which is the target that countries are trying to hit with the Paris Accords. It also states that, quote, the observed increase in carbon emissions over the past 15 to 20 years has been consistent with higher emission pathways. This is the National Climate Assessment Report. In 2014 and 2015, emission growth rates slowed as economic growth became less carbon intensive. Even if this slowing trend continues, however, it is not yet at a rate that would limit global average temperature change to well below 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Now, just to give you context, the document that was put out by NHTSA of the Trump administration actually lists 8 alternatives, as well as one in which we take no action, and states for all of them that the global temperature will rise by 1.287 degrees Celsius by 2040, anywhere between 2.008 and 2.01 degrees Celsius by 2060, and about 3.486 degrees Celsius by 2100. And once again, for our American listeners, that's about 7 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. And because I don't want to leave anyone out here confused, I just want to talk about what those numbers mean. Now, so I'll start with a report from a few years ago by the World Bank Group, who was very clear when they thoroughly explored consequences of an increase of the global Earth temperature of this magnitude. And among those foreseen consequences are the inundation of coastal cities, increasing risks for food production, potentially leading to higher malnutrition rates. Many dry regions becoming drier and wet regions becoming wetter. Unprecedented heat waves in many regions, especially in the tropics. Substantially exacerbated water scarcity in many regions, increased frequency of high intensity tropical cyclones, and irreversible loss of biodiversity, including coral reef systems, which we all know has been a big issue for those who have been studying oceanography and biology as of late. But to get a little bit more specific, according to the National Climate Assessment Report, diving back into that, the frequency and intensity of extreme high temperature events are virtually certain to increase in the future. Once again, extreme precipitation events will very likely continue to increase in frequency and intensity throughout most of the world, and they state that with high confidence. So things like massive rainstorms, all of that. Observed and projected trends for some other types of extreme events such as floods, droughts, and severe storms have more variable regional characteristics, but in the overall will have more extreme precipitation events. And extreme temperatures in the contiguous United States with very high confidence are projected to increase even more than the average temperatures. So get ready for much hotter summers.
Great.
Yeah.
As it's 80 something degrees here in DC in the first week of October.
Yeah, enjoy your fall for now. one day it'll never come back.
No, I've always had the idea, the last snow that you ever see. That's what we're going to talk about in 50 years to our great grandchildren.
Yeah, the last snow that you'll ever see. I mean, there's going to be both, but here's the thing: there's going to be both extremely cold days and extremely warm days. So the cold days are going to become colder, and the warm days are going to become warmer. There's a notion of cold waves, and they're predicted to become less intense, while heat waves will become more intense. So you'll still get cold, cold spats. Those will still happen, and they'll be extreme when they happen. Excuse me, they won't happen. They'll happen slightly more frequently, but to less of an extreme, actually. The number of days below freezing is projected to decline, while the number above 90 degrees Fahrenheit will actually rise. The frequency and intensity, I already talked about that, of heavy precipitation events. Those are just projected to continue to increase over the 21st century. That includes the hurricanes that we're seeing, and an intensification of the hurricanes. The frequency and severity of landfalling atmospheric rivers on the U.S. West Coast. Those are narrow streams of moisture that account for about 30 to 40% of the typical snowpack and annual precipitation in the region, and are associated with severe flooding events. Those will increase as a result of increasing evaporation and resulting higher atmospheric water vapor that occurs with increasing temperature. Projections also indicate large declines in snowpacks in the western United States, and shifts to more precipitation falling as rain than snow in the cold season in many parts of the central and eastern United States. So this is going to screw with a good chunk of our agriculture. And one of the biggest things and I'll stop naming all of the doom and gloom things that are actually going to happen to the United States, but the incidence of largest forest fires in the western United States and Alaska, they've increased since the early 1980s, and it's projected to further increase in those regions as the climate warms, with profound changes to certain ecosystems, and they state that with medium confidence. All while saying that the human effect on recent major U.S. droughts is confident. Much evidence is found for a human influence on surface soil moisture deficits due to increased evapotranspiration caused by higher temperatures. So we're having a major impact, and those are some of the ways that will actually. Those are some of the effects that will actually occur over the next 80 years as the temperature migrates up to about 3.5 degrees Celsius. The scientific evidence at this point is unequivocal about the fact that humans are the cause of global warming, and that major changes are already being observed. The global mean temperature as of right now is, according to NASA's website, is 0.9 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Oceans have warmed by about 0.09 degrees Celsius since the 1950s and are acidifying. sea levels rose by about 20 centimeters since pre-industrial times and are now rising at 3.2 centimeters per decade. An exceptional number of extreme heat waves occurred in the last decade, as you all know, and major food crop growing areas are increasingly affected by drought. Separately, kids, if that didn't scare you enough, the New York Times recently reported that the Trump administration has completed a detailed legal proposal to dramatically weaken a major environmental regulation covering mercury, a toxic chemical emitted from coal-burning power plants, according to a person who has seen the document but is not authorized to speak publicly about it. So we're going to continue. We're going to continue looking into that over the coming weeks. The Washington Post has already picked up that story. So quite frankly, all I can say after that, because I feel like I've said more than enough, is go vote. Vote, vote, vote. Support organizations for climate change and vote. Protest and vote. Organize and vote. And with that, I'll just leave you with well, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say on the topic of voting, there are a number of great organizations that list candidates that support climate change mitigation. League of Conservation Voters has 50 chapters across all 50 states. Check out their website. They have scorecards for elected officials and for people running for office. Sierra Club generally has a chapter in most major metropolitan areas, as well as a lot of rural areas. And they do scorecards and endorsements for local candidates. So if you don't want to take it from us on who to vote for, who is good for your local area and who knows their stuff about climate change, go to any of these great organizations in your area.
Also, it is not 100% partisan. Keep that in mind. Look into all of the candidates that you're voting for, but it doesn't have to be 100% partisan. Who is it? Bob Ingrid, who's going around the country, basically talking about how we can use climate change and sort of this new age of climate change to help build up new small businesses and corporations and things like that. I mean, we should have taken advantage of this 30 years ago and built a completely new industry led by the United States. Instead, the rest of the world is building this industry and they're falling behind. And now with that, I'm just going to leave you with a quote from Jonathan Hickman, because I feel like it really captures this. This is a writer. He's written multiple books as well as comic books as well for Marvel Comics. But
I wonder how you heard of him.
Yeah, I know, right? There's a quote that I just really felt like synced up with everything that I just said, which is everything dies. You, me, everything on this planet, our sun, our galaxy, and eventually the universe itself. This is simply how things are. It's inevitable, and I accept it. What I will not tolerate, and what I find unacceptable, is the unnatural acceleration of that end. We don't have to accept what we're doing, end quote. We don't have to accept what we're doing now. We can actually make changes. And basically all this Trump report is saying in summary, all the NHTSA report is saying is none of the alternatives that we're looking at are going to make a significant difference, so let's not do anything. But what every other report across the globe, as well as this report from NOAA, is saying is if we invest in the appropriate technologies, if we actually make the appropriate policy decisions, that we can have an impact on the climate. We're not going to stop it from changing, but we can at least slow it and over time learn how to control it. So I got nothing more to say about that. I think you guys have heard me ramble about climate change on multiple past episodes. For newer fans, just go back and listen to items from our first few episodes.
Yeah, there actually was an episode we did about the National Climate Assessment, because last year was when the first volume of the 2018 version of it came out.
That's the episode I'm thinking of. Oh, yeah. Go listen to that episode. That was like episode 10. You know what?
Something like that.
Go find it. And someone find it and then listen to it on our page.
and this isn't something that's just coming to light now.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
And this is, I mean, we've been tracking the changes in climate for over a century now. We've been monitoring sea level rise. We've been monitoring carbon emissions for a very long time. It wasn't until 1994, though, that we had the National Climate Assessment. And since then, was the first one in 94. In 2014, there was the third one, and this is the fourth one. the 2018 version. And as someone who used the National Climate Assessment version 3 in 2014 as the basis for their graduate research, I can tell you that the tone of this new National Climate Assessment has changed dramatically. I mean, I just want to read one beginning portion to chapter 4, climate model scenarios and projections. Something that you'd think is more statistics heavy begins with: the Earth's climate past and future is not static. It changes in response to both natural and anthropogenic drivers. Human emissions of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases now overwhelm the influence of natural drivers on the external forces of Earth's climate. Climate change and ocean acidification are already occurring due to the buildup of atmospheric CO2 from human emissions in the industrial era. End quote. Just that statement, for NOAA to put that out under the Trump administration, mind you, in 2017, is a huge statement. And even if the administration that you have is not amenable to the changes that are necessary to mitigate and potentially start reversing the effects of climate change, there are people within the federal government, people in the scientific community, and people within industry too, who are working hard to combat climate change. And it's up to us to find those people and tell them to run for office.
Yes.
But yeah, the National Climate Assessment, if you have the time, I certainly recommend going through it. I mean, even just comparing the last one to this current one, just how much has changed. I mean, talking about sea level rise, something that you mentioned, Newton, which is a particular of interest of mine. In the 2014 version, their very outlandish estimate of like how bad it could get is a 6.6 foot sea level rise by 2100. They thought in 2014 that was outlandish. That's now the top of the acceptable range that we should be expecting in the newest version.
Actually, it's 8 feet now, I thought.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is 8 feet is now the 8 feet is now the that's crazy. That's never going to happen. That was 6.6 feet 4 years ago, and as we get more and better data, we get a better picture of what the future will look like if we don't start acting now. And we could have been acting 30 years ago, but we didn't, so we might as well start now. Better late than never, right?
Yeah. Well, you don't really have a choice.
At a certain point, you know, DC is going to be beachfront property, so maybe we should just let this climate change thing go. We can have beach houses on the Potomac.
On the other hand, we won't have to drive all the way to Ocean City for the beach. I mean, that's...
Hey,
no offense to our Ocean City listeners.
all three of them.
All three of them, if we're that lucky. All right, international news. What you got, Jack?
So like we were saying, the International Astronautical Congress is going on right now in Bremen, Germany. One of the things that came about was in a conversation between NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine and the China National Space Administration Administrator Zhang Kejian. They were talking about how the two countries, which are currently barred from cooperating in space, quote from the China National Space Administration official, CNSA is willing to join our hands with other international partners for the benefit of human civilization and progress of human society. This was also echoed by Administrator Jim Bridenstine, saying he is very open to working with a variety of international partners on lunar exploration. And as we've talked about a lot recently, the moon is the target for NASA, Mars through the moon, with the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway, which maybe the name of that's going to change sometime soon. Who knows? LOPG. We're not a big fan of it over here, but... No. Either way, it's a thing. We have to deal with it. That if we move forward with LOPG, and it is by its very nature an international project from the get-go, NASA has been talking about it like an international project. We're going to need maybe some unconventional partners like China, like India, like Japan, the United Arab Emirates. I mean, there's all these new space organizations and space agencies, both national and commercial, opening their doors, and the moon could be not just gateway to Mars. It could be a gateway to international partnerships that further our infrastructure, our ability to get to, from, and work, live, and play in space.
That's kind of cool. That's like, it's like we're turning ISS into the moon. Like we're like whatever we utility ISS has, we're converting it over to playing with the international community over at the moon as opposed to there.
That's the idea, is that as the ISS has been deteriorating over the last couple of years, still more than 50
Space Station, by the way, for
over half of the budget for the ISS goes to repairs now, as opposed to actually getting things to go up there to do experiments or send people, whatever it is that you as a nation state are doing in space.
Maintenance to some extent can qualify as experimentation. We learn a lot of new things from maintenance as well.
That's true. But as it gets up there in age and we start talking about plans to deorbit it in the late 2020s, we need something to follow it up with. And LOPG, with its intended launch date of 2023 ? There's still some questions going around at NASA over whether it's actually going to be launching. But LOPG could be that ISS Part 2, so long as the agreements are set in stone now, so that we have the financial and structural and infrastructural backing of all of our partner nations. And I think because China has been barred from working with the U.S. on space for so long, there is a communication breakdown that has happened. And reigniting that friendship in space could be, well, maybe not igniting anything in space, but, using space as a medium to further develop a relationship with China as they become more and more an international space power would be good for the United States to keep it as a peaceful domain.
Yeah, it would. It would. I mean, you know what you would need to sort of ignite anything, some sort of thing that would push.
You would need a force.
So. It's almost like not a force. I'm just thinking like some sort of thing that we have, out there that we could apply maybe mass and acceleration to, and. All right, I'll stop. Moving on.
Ether mass times acceleration. I just need a shirt.
I like it.
That says that.
Like it. Ether ma. I like it.
Yeah, Ether ma.
The ether's not real, by the way. We can, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah. I was just trying to have a reference to something.
All right, let's not get too dirty. Let's do it for the general populace. So moving on to latest in tech. But for real, I do hope we can coordinate with China. Hopefully that staves off other issues that we have in China in terms of conflicts that we've had with them. It enhances some channels for cooperation with them, such that they're not looked at by our entire government as being so adversarial, and so they're not as adversarial to us, quite frankly.
I will add later in the article that we have linked down in the show notes. You will see that we're not just talking about civil space exploration. We're not just talking about the moon. We're not just talking about civilian astronauts and civilian assets in space, but actually talking about space situational awareness and space traffic management, which has historically within the U.S. fallen under the domain of defense, because it is a national security issue to make sure that your rocket with your $1 billion satellite does not get hit by a stray bolt or something.
Yeah.
So we're talking a collaboration not seen previously between the U.S. and China in a, as you're saying, a terrestrially volatile climate when it comes to international relations between the U.S. and China. This could be something that can act as a détente to ease tensions between the two nations over border disputes, over what have you, in the future.
Yeah, I wonder how long that. I wonder how long that'll last. About as long as your love for the word détente.
I would say 2 to 6 years.
2 to 6 years. All right, you heard it here first. Latest in tech. So the National Academy of Science actually is making a case for W first. This is pretty big news. The National Academy of Sciences, or NAS, which I'll refer to it as from now on, released a pre-publication version of what they call their exoplanet science strategy. According to their description of the document, the exoplanet science strategy highlights strategic priorities for large coordinated efforts that will support the scientific goals of the broad exoplanet science community. This report outlines a strategic plan that will answer lingering questions through a combination of large, ambitious, community-supported efforts and support for diverse, creative, community-driven investigator research. This author is really in love with commas.
Who isn't? Oxford commas for the win.
I'm fine with Oxford commas. Actually, they're not actually using Oxford commas. They're just using a lot of commas.
Well, the
Yeah.
Pluto with them.
Yeah, seriously. So I get started on Pluto. Two important recommendations that are made here are with regard to imaging. And in particular, I'd like to talk about their recommendations that, quote, NASA should lead a large strategic direct imaging mission capable of measuring the reflected light spectra of temperate terrestrial planets orbiting sun-like stars. And the findings that led to that conclusion was in reference to TESS, by the way, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite Mission. I'd like to talk about that recommendation and another recommendation that, quote, NASA should launch W1st to conduct its microlensing survey of distant planets and to demonstrate the technique of coronagraphic spectroscopy on exoplanet targets. So now first, there was a finding that a microlensing survey would complement the statistical surveys of transits and radial velocities by searching for planets with separations of greater than 1 AU, which is, by the way, the unit of measurement that's the distance from Earth to our sun. So let's start by diving into what microlensing is. Unlike most other planet detection techniques, gravitational microlensing doesn't just rely on detection of photons from either the host object, what we call the lens, rather. So, well, hang on. Let me think. Let me clear this up. So it doesn't simply rely on detection of photons from either the host or the planet. Rather, planets are discovered by their gravitational perturbation of light from a more distant source. So a massive object, which is called the lens, will bend the light of a bright background object, which we call the source. This can generate multiple distorted, magnified, and brightened images of the background source. Microlensing is caused by the same physical effect as strong lensing and weak lensing, but it is studied using very different observational techniques. In strong and weak lensing, the mass of the lens is large enough, like the mass of a galaxy or a galaxy cluster, that the displacement of light by the lens can be resolved with a high-resolution telescope, such as Hubble. With microlensing, the lens mass is too low, such as the mass of a planet or a star, for the displacement of light to be observed easily. But the apparent brightening of the source may still be detected. In such a situation, the lens will pass by the source in a reasonable amount of time, seconds to years instead of millions of years. As the alignment changes, the source's apparent brightness changes, and this can actually be monitored to detect and study the event. Thus, unlike with strong and weak gravitational lenses, a microlensing event is a transient phenomenon from a human timescale perspective. The rise and fall of the source brightness must be monitored over time using what's called photometry. This function of brightness versus time is actually known as a light curve. And the second topic, just real quick, we can dive into this a bit, is coronagraphic spectroscopy. The coronagraph is a telescopic attachment designed to suppress the diffraction from the host star of a candidate planet that's being observed. It blocks out the direct light from a star so that nearby objects, which otherwise would be hidden in the star's bright glare, can actually be resolved. Most coronagraphs are intended to view the corona of the sun, but a new class of conceptually similar instruments called stellar coronagraphs, to distinguish them from solar coronagraphs, are being used to find extrasolar planets and circumstellar disks around nearby stars. And the whole idea is to achieve a very high contrast direct detection using internal coronography. and what's called wavefront control, which helps mitigate the effect of scattering arising from the combination of atmospheric turbulence, which is really a problem for ground-based telescopes, and time-varying optical aberrations in the telescope and instruments. As WFIRST is a space-based telescope, obviously atmospheric turbulence isn't much of a problem, but the wavefront control system, which is also known as the adaptive optics system on ground-based telescopes, makes up for the fact that coronagraphs don't allow for active control of scattered light induced by time-varying optical aberrations. And studies for ground-based elements have required sort of a combination of the two. So these are the two major recommendations: is the use of that technique, and basically recommending that we launch WFIRST with that as a focus of its mission, that microlensing technique and the use of coronagraphic spectroscopy.
So we're going to be able to directly image planets with WFIRST?
Yeah, that's about it. That about sums it up.
That's the Spark Notes version. No, I mean this is
TLDR.
This is really interesting because very rarely does this happen where the National Academies will get involved in I don't want to call it a political fight on the Hill, but there has been a proposal from the current administration to cut WFIRST, mainly because James Webb has been costing so much to produce. Its $800 million over budget, and could potentially grow even more if we see any more delays in JWST's timeline, or if any technical snags along the way. So, and the Congress is
don't wish
not
that on us.
really.
Let's not.
Let's knock on wood.
Yeah, just like. All right,
but
keep going.
Yeah, so and the Congress has not been very active in the defense of WFIRST. Neither of the bills from the House or Senate to fund NASA for fiscal year 2019 specifically mention WFIRST. It would be under the astrophysics portion because it's looking at astronomical objects as opposed to heliophysics, looking at our sun. And there's no mention in there over whether WFIRST is funded or not, even though Congress could go in and congressionally mandate that this specific program happen. So yeah, it's interesting that the National Academies is getting involved in what could be viewed as a political fight, seeing as how the future is uncertain for WFIRST, and then for the National Academies to come in and say this specific program needs to happen to achieve these scientific goals set forth by the National Academies. And as we go into another decadal survey process starting in 2020, looking at that 2021 through 2030 decade, if the Congress decides not to defend WFIRST, what program takes its place, and how long of a development time are we going to be in before we can achieve those scientific goals, if the National Academies is telling us right now that we are on track to achieve them?
I know. This is my problem. I mean, we were talking about going, go vote. And while I'll even say WFIRST is not as serious of an issue as climate change. WFIRST is about us discovering other planets. This is about climate change is about us saving our own planet. But this is an important project in terms of the future of humanity. Even when we come to sort of these crossroads where, we need to get our leaders to focus on things like climate change and all of that, we still need to conduct this kind of science, because it takes us doing this for centuries, quite frankly, to go and become this multi-planetary species that we're all dreaming of, and to actually travel to all of these places. These are the first steps, and we need to make sure that regardless of what's happening right now, regardless of the administrations and all of that, that this stuff stays above all of that, and that we continue to fund this kind of work and this kind of important research to heighten our understanding of the universe at large, as well as to bring us into the future.
Yeah, I have included in the coming soon to space section. It'll be the last link that we share. It's a link that you can click and find out all of the deadlines and dates for requesting absentee ballots, for early voting if your state offers that, for registering to vote if you are not registered at your current place of residence. Vote early, vote often, vote every time.
Check your registration too.
Make sure
you check your registration.
every Monday from now through the end of October, make sure you check your registration. That's something I've been doing. I've been seeing a lot of people on Twitter and Facebook doing that because states go through and purge their voter rolls of people that are deceased or no longer live there or are otherwise ineligible to cast a ballot. And you don't want to get caught up in that, because if you walk into your polling place on election day, one, it'll be very embarrassing that you can't vote, but two, you don't get the cool sticker. So, I mean, those are the only real benefits of voting. Oh, and representation or something like that.
Yeah, but it's really all about the sticker, though. I mean,
absolutely. And you and I are talking as DC voters who don't have real representation. So
I was gonna say, like,
vote for us.
You mean you guys actually get representatives, like, for paying taxes? It's weird.
Supposedly,
right.
There's some document everyone talks about, Constitution or something. I don't know. I thought it had something to do with D&D, but I guess not.
I think they actually started like a whole war over this whole thing. I don't know. It's weird.
Two, actually.
But yeah, definitely go and vote. I don't think we can say that anymore during this episode. But other than that, I mean, we back, baby. Like I said, we have new episodes coming soon. We're for right now, we're going to keep the every other week structure. But we do have a new format for the show, which will eventually lead to us being back to week. We're just sort of sorting out the final details, and we'll keep you guys posted on Facebook, Twitter, all of our forms of social media. So just keep up with us. We will be posting, outside of that, news articles and things that'll just keep you up to date on space in the meantime.
Yeah. So do you want to wrap up through the last? I have two things that are coming soon to space. Sure. That are pretty interesting. So one on Thursday and one on Friday of this week. So if you are listening to this on Wednesday, I'm talking about tomorrow and the day after that. On Thursday, there's going to be a lecture with a friend of the show, author and scientist David Funky Spoon Grinspoon, is going to be talking about life on Mars and robotic exploration at K&L Gates, which is a prominent law firm in DC that works on space law and regulation. This is being put on by the Museum of Science Fiction. On Friday, there is a lecture at the Philosophical Society of Washington.
The Cosmos Club.
At the Cosmos Club.
Philosophical Society of Washington, yes.
Yep, it's over in DuPont. It's right next to the DuPont Metro, and it is about rotorcraft exploring Titan by Elizabeth Zibby Turtle. And she is a planetary scientist over at APL, Johns Hopkins APL. And both of those events look to be a lot of fun. I'm going to try and make it to both for sure. Going to try and make the David Grinspoon one, Life on Mars, just for the David Bowie pun. I think it's worth attending.
Yeah.
But got anything else, Newton?
No. Also, happy birthday to longtime listener and fan of the show, Cameron.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday, Cameron.
Yeah, happy birthday. It's his birthday this week.
It is. I actually think it's today.
Shout him out. It's today. Yeah, actually,
you're
right.
Today. It's October
We're recording
1st.
on Monday, so just for a point of clarification.
Yeah, so Cameron, you are going to be listening to this on Wednesday, or we'll send you an advance copy tomorrow. So
yeah. Cameron is a major advocate and a space advocate and volunteer in the area. So yeah. Happy birthday, man.
Yeah. All right. So, that's all I got. Should be an exciting next couple weeks. Hopefully, you all remember the main message from this episode. Go to usvotefoundation.org and make sure you are registered to vote. And if you are not registered to vote, go register to vote. Go vote on Election Day, November 6th, early. All the dates are on there, or absentee if you cannot be at your polling place on Election Day.
And don't forget the real message behind the show. Blockchain, blockchain, blockchain. All right, we're out of here.
We back, baby.
We back, baby.
As always, I'm your host, Jack.
And I'm Newton
at Astra.